Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Lapel for New Focus Recordings, and I'm happy to be joined by Christopher Bailey here, whose second album with us, Rain Infinity, comes out tomorrow. And we're really excited to be hosting this and working with you once again, Chris. How's everything going?
Pretty good.
Good. Nice background there. It looks
I-
like the wilds of Boston.
yeah, the weather here is doesn't look anything like this. I'll tell you
Yeah.
that right now.
Yeah. Um, so your first record with us was a 2 CD set of your keyboard works, Glimmering Webs,
Hmm.
and this album sort of turns more towards chamber music, but electroacoustic stuff, and it's a really nice mix uh, of some small ensemble pieces. There's one sort of medium-sized ensemble and one a purely electronic piece. Um, is there anything you want to sort of say about generally in the sort of assembling of this record, the background of it, before we dive into some more specific tracks?
Um, Not really. It's just kind of a eclectic collection of pieces that seem to go pretty well with each other. There wasn't any kind of overall theme, although there are a bunch of shared traits that some of the works have. Now that I'm actually looking at the list, including some like composing materials that I reused from piece to piece and that
Uh,
sort of thing. But that might not be necessarily anything you would hear
yeah.
when listening. But
Well, I often make this mistake in these chats of like front loading the chat, and it takes a long time for us to
Mhm.
hear any music. So let's not do that this time.
Okay.
And let's dive right in and listen to the first track on the album, and then we'll talk about it. It's also the first of several duos, short duos for violin and cello, and it's performed here by Miranda Cookson and Mariel Roberts. And we'll take a listen, and then we'll chat about it, and also shout out some people who worked on the album, and go from there. Cool,
Well,
great. Great.
yeah. So that's not quite the whole piece, but it's most of it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Uh, so, before I forget, let me just mention some key people on this record. The mixing was done by you and also Augustus Arnone. And all the tracks were recorded with Octavian Audio by Ryan Strieber, except for Rain Lullaby, which was also recorded by Augustus, and Retreat, which is all electronic and realized by you. And got a beautiful cover art by Lucas Bailey, and the back cover by Bruce
Mhm.
Bailey. And Mark Wolf did the design. Um, and
Yeah.
so,
Lucas is my son, and Bruce is my dad, who's
oh, cool. So it's
retired and is now like an artist. So
nice. So there's a multi-generational component
yeah.
going on. I mean, one of the things that I find interesting about your music in general is the uh, sort of overlapping considerations between your acoustic work and your electroacoustic work. Also, like, but how the context sort of transforms those considerations. And I wonder, I mean, is that something that is happening on a conscious level, or you're just sort of with something like the duo, for instance? Uh, these sort of glitchy sort of modular motives that are getting like turned around in a way. I feel like sometimes I hear that kind of thing cropping up in your electronic writing too. But I wonder if it comes out any differently for you when you're writing in an acoustic context, or is it a totally subconscious thing, or what?
I think in my electronic pieces, most of them I um, like consciously try to, maybe unconsciously try to write the same kind of music as I do in my instrumental music, at least in some way or another. Um, so uh, yeah, so a lot of my electronic music is very gestural, and there's fairly heavy emphasis on, at least in the, well, either on like rhythmic gestures that you could imagine being played by instruments, even if they're being played by electronic sounds. But on this album, the electronic pieces are all uh, very, for lack of a better term, pitch based. They're not really like musique concrète or that kind of thing
Mm-hmm.
for the most part. Um, so they're kind of electronic. I think of them as electronic chamber music in the case of Retreat, and then of course Ark of Infinity is electronic chamber music, since it's with guitar and electronics. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's really like one musical language, I guess, that either gets used to write electronic pieces or acoustic pieces, depending on the occasion.
Yeah. And I mean, would it be too boilerplate and annoying a question to ask you to sort of talk a little bit about that musical language? I know that this is sort of the kind of question that a lot of composers sort of can't stand. Uh, but in the notes for Glimmering Webs, this is a phrase that always stuck in my head that um, it was either maximalism into minimalism or minimalism into maximalism, and now I can't remember.
Oh yeah. So yeah, well, I grew up um like when I was a teenager, I discovered a lot of the kind of very modernist music, Boulez, Babbitt, etc. But then at the same time, I was also really into the minimalists, and Steve Reich, Philip Glass, and so on. And at a certain point, um, this whole idea of, in the late 20th century, there was the whole idea that you were never supposed to repeat anything, and so repetition became kind of this fetish that you either maximally avoided or maximally embraced in the case of minimalism. And I wanted, I think once we had recordings, and especially once recordings were in formats where you could easily create loops and do that kind of thing with samples and all that sort of thing. Uh, the ban on repetition no longer makes sense, because if you write a piece with no repetition, I can just sample it and all of a sudden it has repetition in it.
Right.
So, uh, and that went hand in hand in my own kind of journey, like trying to understand how to listen to some of the really dense modernist stuff, particularly Babbitt's music, I think. Like I never listen to those pieces in one sitting. I'll just pick one small part of the piece, maybe 30 seconds or a minute, and just listen to it, just that portion, like 5 times or something, just getting to know all the little features and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that way of, if you carry that way of thinking about modernist style to its sort of maximum, wherever it's going, you end up with this idea of maybe you have like modernist language, but you're using a lot of repetition with that. And I know I'm not alone in this. Like a lot of the music of my colleagues is also, I think, about this idea of throwing out the old prohibition on repetition
Sure.
while sometimes retaining that edgy modernist gestural and harmonic language and stuff.
Yeah.
And
Well,
another aspect to it, a final aspect to it, is that when I'm composing, like I'll be at the piano and I'll like, have a certain configuration of pitches or whatever, and I'll try different octaves, different spacings of chords and that kind of thing until I get the gesture just right. And then I'll play it back to myself a few times and I'll be like, yeah, that sounds really cool. And, if you're listening to a piece of music, that just goes by in an instant. And it's sort of unfair that, or sad, or I don't know how you want to say, but it's kind of, I would like the audience to have that experience that I had, because, I don't really think of my musical material in an intellectual way. Like it's just the same as any music in the past. I hear harmonies that I think really gel or sound pretty cool, and that's what I write down. And so I want people to hear that the same kind of thing that I heard.
yeah.
And I think the repetition allows people to have that experience. So
Right. I feel like there was something in some notes that I've read of yours where you were sort of describing the fact that the compositional time where you're sitting and pouring over a few measures allows you to get really deeply inside the intricate makeup of that material, right? But then when you finally listen to it in a piece, it goes by, maybe in 2
exactly.
seconds, and the listener didn't have the opportunity to sort of get inside that world in the same way that you did. So yeah,
that also came from studying music, where we would take 6 measures and spend 3 hours just talking about them, and maybe composing that experience out in a way like, not quite to that extreme, but
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's very cool. Do you think that kind of thing is manifesting itself in? I mean, I really hear that in the duo, like the excerpt we just listened to. But I think a lot of these.
Yeah, you can hear a lot of that in the duo, in Time Lash.
Yeah.
In Passacaglia for After Hall & Oates 2, and I think a little bit in Ark of Infinity. Maybe not so much there, but definitely
Yeah.
a little bit, yeah. And some of the movements of the duo, there's a total of 6, so
yeah.
they all
This is sort of
around.
a prismatic way of taking an idea and sort of turning it around and keeping the overall sort of set of materials. And cool. So let's pivot to Retreat, which is the
Actually, since we were talking about that, I think it might make sense to listen to the Time Lash excerpt, because I think
sure. Okay, great. Yeah, let's pivot to Time Lash. So this is the largest instrumentation on the album: piano, cello, bass, clarinet, violin, and I'll read out
regular clarinet, but yes.
Oh, my mistake. Sorry. Blair McMillan piano, John Popham on cello, Vasco Dukovsky on clarinet, and Miranda Cookson on violin. Carl Bettendorf is conducting. And let's take a listen, and then we'll talk about it. Great. So that was Time Lash, which is the fourth track on the record.
Mm-hmm.
And well, yeah. So you were saying that you feel like that sort of manifests the same kind
Yeah,
of.
you were talking about a prismatic turning over of
Yeah,
material,
sure.
and so that sounded like it would fit the bill for that description.
Yeah. I mean, when I listened to that complete piece, Time Lash, I felt also that there were a lot of moments where you sort of use the different characteristics of the acoustic instruments to create these sort of hybrid, almost almost like electronic music analogs. Like one instrument would trigger the attack, and then the other instrument would sort of grow out of it with a sustain, and a third instrument would like punctuate the ending. Was
Mhm.
that me like mapping on some sort of Davidovsky obsession that I have, or was that like a sort of fairly thing
Um,
that you're doing?
I don't think there's not a lot of direct influence there, but the way the rhythm in that piece is constructed, I had like I have like a sort of a what's the medieval term? It's like a rhythm of, I don't know, 6 measures or something, of 30-second notes, like this kind of Morse code kind of rhythm.
Okay, I think
And
I know what you're talking about. I
that
can't remember the term either. Yeah,
that repeats itself over the course of the whole work.
yeah.
And but let's say you had like da 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 da, each of those attacks might be in a different instrument, or the rhythm gets distributed all around the ensemble. So
Mhm.
it's pretty much exactly what you're describing. um Somebody starts a note, another person maybe plays a couple of repetitions, a third instrument comes in on the third attack and holds another pitch or whatever. So yeah, the rhythm kind of gets distributed around the ensemble. So
Almost like a klangfarben for a rhythmic sort of
yeah.
cantus firmus or something. Uh, but I mean, do you feel like that's related at all to Babbitt, the whole time point thing? This sort of
um
manifestation of well, but I guess in that case, he's taking a row form and then figuring out a way to map it onto a rhythmic.
yeah, I think that's a little bit more abstract,
Yeah.
what I did, but it's a little bit similar in that there's kind of this sequence of rhythmic attacks that, as a composer, you can it's sort of like the rule is you got to use all the attacks in some way. Sometimes uh, uh an attack will just be the end of a crescendo or something like that. So it's not always an event that happens.
Got it.
The rule
Yeah.
is I got to use the attack in some way, in somewhere
Right.
in the ensemble.
Right.
So then I just distribute the music around that. There's actually I actually had to give a talk on this piece in South Korea back in 2005 or something like that. And I had all these examples. So eventually I turned it into a little blog post, which you can find on my website,
Mhm.
which talks about how I wrote it and how I sort of sketched it out, and then how I kind of squeezed the sketch into the rhythmic structure that I was just talking about.
Cool.
So in case anyone's curious, just go to my
Maybe you can
website.
send me the link to the blog post. I'll post it on the album page on our
Sure.
website. Um, so well, do you want to move on to the sort of electronic side of the album?
Sure.
Maybe we start with Retreat, which is the long electronic only.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is the middle is kind of excited, but the it's kind of a slow, fast, slow structure in this piece. And this
Yeah.
excerpt is from actually towards very near the end
Mhm.
of the piece, and it's just kind of one of the more ambient-ish moments of it.
Okay, cool. Well, let's take a listen. This is Retreat from Chris Bailey's Rain Infinity.
Central
Great. So we were hearing a little bit of that unique instrument, the Utterbot, which shows up on another track.
Yeah. So actually, in Retreat, the Utterbots are virtual, but in Rain Lullaby, they were real,
Right.
performed by Jacob Barton, who invented the instrument.
Right.
Um, and yeah, the Utterbot is basically a bottle blowing instrument, which is uh, hard to tune, but
Yeah.
Jacob is kind of a wizard with that. So
Is it like a different amount of liquid in each bottle? Is that how it's?
actually, you have a fixed amount of liquid, but it's like a glove underneath. It's like a rubber glove underneath it. So you pull it,
Oh, I see.
pitches.
So it's just one bottle.
Yeah,
That's amazing. I
yeah.
assume I assumed
So
it was sort of like the I don't remember what the name is for the instrument where you have multiple wine glasses essentially.
you're right. I know what you're talking about. No, this is
I assumed it was like that, but that's
so yeah, and
virtuosic. Yeah.
again in Retreat these are virtual, so I
Yeah.
cheated a
Right.
little, but in Rain Lullaby, yeah, he plays that in 17 Equal Temperament, and
Yeah, that's amazing.
yeah, and
So
he's done a lot of
actually,
work
well,
with.
that brings up an interesting question too, because the well, I know in general microtonality is an important part of your work, and I feel like it becomes a little bit more overt in some of the electronic music. Maybe that's not a fair characterization. I'm not sure, but uh, for one thing, I was wondering if, like in Retreat, is it a fixed division of the octave? Uh,
Retreat is kind of based around a scale called Centaur, which was I'm not sure. I think it was invented by Craig Grady, who's a just intonation composer,
uh-huh.
although it may have been Irv Wilson. Well, this says Craig Grady's 12-tone 7-limit scale. So yeah, um, so he invented this scale. It's a 12-note scale that justly tunes the notes of the chromatic scale in a certain pattern, and it includes several harmonic seventh intervals,
Yeah.
um, as well as standard fifths and major and minor thirds.
Hmm.
And so, of course, with just intonation scale, the steps are unequally distant from each other, and so you get some intervals are sound relatively in tune, like certain fifths are perfectly in tune theoretically, and
Right.
other fifths and fourths and thirds and stuff are way out from what they'd normally be. So it's kind of fun to kind of explore that inequality. And in this piece, actually, there's some other elements in this piece. So there are two kalimbas that are tuned in 23 equal,
Hmm.
and they kind of hover around. They, I think the role they play pitch wise is they try to kind of match what's going on in the rest of the ensemble, but they can't really do it because it's 23 EDO, and they're actually using not all the steps of that. So they're like playing this like weird sort of like I think it's called Mavila scale
Hmm.
that they're playing. So, but they sort of try to match what's going on in the rest of the ensemble, and then the Utterbots and the I guess mainly the Utterbots. There's also a viola makes an appearance, and there's also like just kind of free electronics here and there, and they will step out of the Centaur scale but always in like just intonation patterns. So they'll add like an extra 11th harmonic or something like that here and there. So the Centaur scale is that 12-note scale is kind of the basis of the piece, but then there's other pitches that get added here and there throughout.
That's cool. I mean, is there uh you
And
said that Rain Lullaby is in 17 EDO, right?
mhm.
This one is the Centaur. Arc of Infinity is like some kind of just intonation derived scale, no?
Well, Arc of Infinity is this other idea I had, which I used to call it crystallized just intonation.
Mhm.
There's a video by this guy Adam Neely
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
called the seven what is it, the 7 levels of jazz harmony or something, and the last level he calls intonalism, and that's where I think you basically play a melody in 12 equal and standard tuning, but the chords around the melody get like justly tuned
Mm.
to each note. um so, and that's what I do essentially in Ark of Infinity, same kind of thing, where the guitar is playing in 12,
Right.
but the harmonies that are around it kind of coalesce in just intonation sonorities. I do
Right.
also do the same thing in a couple other pieces, including Abstraction 6 for saxophone and electronics, which is on an earlier album, Immolation Ritual.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, you've used that technique a few times. But.
That's cool. Is there, I mean, is it sort of mostly intuitive? Like when you choose to sort of, uh, I don't know, structure a piece around any one of these systems? I guess with Arc of Infinity.
Actually, with these pieces are all like 12-tone pieces, so there's that whole structural aspect to it, and I really like the interaction of that with a just intonation scale, because like if you're writing a 12-tone piece, you kind of expect all the intervals to be the same,
Yeah.
because you're transposing things around and stuff. But I like the fact that if you take some motive and you transpose it up a whole step, all of a sudden it's not in tune anymore, or it sounds tweaked or weird in some way. So I
Yeah.
really
That's a
like
really, that's a very
that.
cool way of looking at it. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about well temperaments, and I guess it's sort of, in a way, it's related. I mean, this whole idea of,
Yeah, it's like an extreme version of that.
yeah, like,
The
I mean, a
key,
modulation becomes sort of,
also a character change.
yeah, right. It
Yeah,
becomes a color change, a character change, and then it also it's
yeah.
much more significant when you, if you have a return. And I would imagine this, obviously the same thing is going to happen if you have PO, which is your first, expression of a row at like the sort of base pitch level, and then you have a transposition of it, then it's going to take on a totally different character. So that's
Hmm.
in a just intonation situation. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, we could go listen to the Ark excerpt since
Sure.
we're
Yeah,
talking
let's
about it.
check out. So this is the penultimate track on the recording, Arc of Infinity, and I'm playing guitar, and it's classical guitar and electronics. And let's have a listen. Cool. Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the piece. It arrives at this like oasis moment. Um, and I sort of hear what you mean in terms of this coalescing around. I think it's like when I get to that A flat, that sort of tremoloed A flat, and there's this halo of harmony that sort of coalesces around that note. Well, I don't know. Is that
Mhm.
is that an accurate sort of
Yeah, that excerpt, I'm not sure it's front and center in that excerpt. There are other places in the piece where you can really hear, like you'll be just repeating a single note, and the harmonies around it are kind of, you can hear them like shifting in and out tuning wise.
okay.
Um, so there are
Yeah,
definitely
I
moments
think
like
right,
that
right.
where you can hear that.
Um, well, so why did you pick this spot specifically?
Um, it's just a nice action-packed moment that I
Yeah,
thought
yeah,
would be cool to pull
yeah.
out.
For me, listening to it, I just like I'm brought back to this sort of quasi video game style experience of navigating these like very quick meter changes and sort of odd groupings and stuff. So my solution, and I imagine, there would be a scenario where I could learn the tape well enough to not need to do this, but it wasn't in the cards for that particular recording session. But for the listeners out there, my solution for this was to have a click track. But even navigating the click track for this particular score it does feel a little bit like a video game, because there's so many fast changes. The experience of finally absorbing it and performing it when it feels natural is really, really gratifying. Was that, I'm curious about that sort of, I actually think that is the approach to rhythm and gesture and phrasing in this piece feels to me to be distinct from the other pieces on the album. It's a little less. Well, we were sort of talking before about this prismatic, like almost sort of dogged presentation of a material, and this feels a bit more.
It's less overtly repetitive, for sure.
Yeah, it's more sort of just a constant unfolding,
Yeah, that's definitely true.
And without too many spots in the piece where you would really even be able to latch on to a consistent division of the pulse, I think. There's like a few spots where you have like steady 16ths, I guess, but usually gets broken up fairly quickly with like some other division, quintuplets or whatever. And was that what was, you just wanted to sort of create like
I think in this piece, there was once again
a
sequence of meters that keeps repeating.
Yeah.
And then I just intuitively fill those in with, whatever made musical sense at the time.
Yeah. The overall structure of the piece is also really great, with the three soliloquies between the different electronic tracks, and the sort of overall pacing, like the very large second cue. It does feel like an arc of infinity, I think, to play it. And yeah. Did you want to sort of weigh in on any other element of that particular piece, or?
You'd mentioned the video games, and it made me think of I have these like virtual instruments that I programmed in Lisp a long time ago that I used for a bunch of pieces. And like on my other album, there's a piece that Marilyn Nonkin played, and she talked about like laser beam sounds and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Some of that in here too. And a lot of those sounds are, when I compose, I often look up random words in the dictionary and then try to do like free association to come up with textures and that kind of thing. But in this case, I did that and tried to come up with ideas for virtual instruments or variations on, simple instrument ideas. For example, in this piece, one of the instruments is like what I call a dirty sampled guitar. So I have like notes that I've plucked out from actual pieces, and those are the samples that I use to play this virtual guitar. And so each note has different like noise and echo and crud around it. So each pitch is very individual and has its own like little character and stuff. So it's sort of the opposite of what you get from a professional sampler, where everything is exactly the same and clean and so on. This one is like intentionally dirty sampling. Yeah. And then I layer other kind of textures on top of that to create different sorts of articulations that this instrument can play. So, and there's a couple of these instruments that are in play, and one of them in particular gives you like the laser beam like sounds and that sort of thing if you use certain articulations with it. So
cool. I don't know if this is glossing things glossing is probably not the right word, or but I sort of see an affinity in what you're describing with the dirty sampler about sort of having sounds be unique. I see an affinity with your approach to the sort of putting 12-tone music through a JI scale so that you don't end up ever having like a sort of generic
Mm-hmm.
relationship, right? So each note and each timbre ends up being unique, and each expression of a
Yeah.
row can be unique as well in the same way. And that, I think, yeah, that's really, I mean, it comes off, I think, because there's a quality in Ark, but also in your other pieces, Retreat for sure, uh, that you're hearing. Yeah, you're really hearing like a lot of very fresh, unique colors that you just don't really encounter as a listener.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'd never thought of that correspondence, but that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, do you want to add anything else or about the album or
Um,
parting shots?
yeah, not too much. The performers all sound fantastic, and uh yeah, like I did a lot of the, initial splicing and so on, and then Augustus did a lot of the sort of compression and all that kind of audio magic to
Yeah.
make it all come together, especially on Retreat.
Yeah.
Which is an all electronic work. We really kind of workshop that pretty hard to get it. My goal, which I don't know whether I really succeeded, but if you know the album, I think it's Beauty and the Beast, or Beauty in the Beast, maybe it is, by Wendy Carlos, and it's kind of an
Oh,
all electronic, Just
uh-huh.
Intonation. I believe it's Just Intonation album, like just really beautifully done um, stuff on there, and so that was sort of my model for Retreat, and
Cool. I'll have to check it out. I'm not familiar with that.
yeah,
Um,
and Augustus really helped to make those sounds come to life.
cool.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was great to get to know these pieces and be able to put this album out and get to know more of your work. It's always a real pleasure. So, everybody, you can find this record on our site, our website, newfocusrecordings.com, also on Bandcamp, all the other places that you would find music these days. This album should be there, and check it out. It's really cool stuff, and I think we're going to sign off. So thanks so much, Chris,
Yep.
and
Thank you.
stay healthy, take care, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, you too.
All right, good night.
Good night.